it possible to form deeper connections online? It's a great question, and it's one that I have been wrestling with for a number of years. But my answer is yes, it is. Now, obviously, the deepest connection we can form will happen when we sit knee to knee with somebody, we look them eyeball to eyeball, we speak authentically from our heart, and connect with that person one to one. But in many of our work environments now, as the world becomes more virtual, we will not have the opportunity to build a relationship that way. In many organizations, we're now being tasked with working globally across geographic regions with people that we may never meet face to face. So we have to be able to deepen our relationships, deepen our connections in environments where we may be on camera, we may be speaking to each other, but we may not be meeting face to face. So I want to talk for a minute about what brain science tells us about this. First of all, we know that human beings crave meaning, crave connection. The brain science supports that we learn best when we learn socially. In fact, one of the brain-based principles that we talk about is that social learning fires mirror neurons. This is really fascinating stuff. So we used to think it took years for babies to begin to notice their environment and pick up on emotional cues. But now researchers think that babies begin to observe and mirror neurons begin to fire within 5 minutes of their births. They begin to mimic their parents' expressions. I find that fascinating. And what we know about the way we learn is that if we observe others describing a difficult challenge and how they overcame it, for example, mirror neurons will fire in our brains as we listen to that. We'll basically experience what our colleague experienced as they describe it. When we observe in a class somebody practice a skill, meet up against an obstacle, overcome it, and then learn from it, mirror neurons are firing through that as we experience the emotional context of that learning experience. So when we learn in the company of others, we basically learn faster, retain more, learn longer. It is a really important thing to know about what humans need in order to retain information and apply it. We do better in the company of others. So one thing that we do at NetSpeed Learning Solutions to try and jumpstart that process is that when we do a course, we may have people post their photos and bios up front before the course begins so that we can all begin to get to know each other before we step into a virtual classroom experience, so that we start to see each other as real people with real jobs, real challenges, real issues. And then when we see each other's names and hear voices in the virtual classroom, maybe even see each other on camera, we've already begun to build that relationship. As a facilitator, you want to put yourself on camera. And the reason you want to do that is that your presence, communicating authentically and sincerely, will actually cause mirror neurons to fire in the brains of your learners. And when that begins to happen, when people have a sense of rapport and connection with you as a facilitator, as well as with their colleagues in the class, you start to get the richest, deepest learning experience, even though you're not sitting knee to knee with people. So, the challenge here is to get comfortable with being on camera, to allow ourselves to disclose appropriately with storytelling, to encourage our learners to answer juicy questions and share what's happening in their world. And obviously, the content of your class will have something to do with how much you're doing here, but our jobs as facilitators is to create the safe learning space where people can bring themselves to the learning experience and share freely with each other. And so that's our challenge as facilitators in the virtual classroom, is to consciously deepen connections that people are making with each other. And the payoff then is going to be richer learning experiences that actually result in learning transfer and application on the job. So I encourage you to try some techniques that we've talked about in this video and see what happens in your classroom.